Hi everyone, welcome to another episode of Slice of the Reef, our new podcast that demystifies the art of saltwater fish keeping. My name is Billy.
And I'm Giancarlo, aka Banana or Fishy Fish. We're going to be your guides today into the amazing world beneath the waves, but also in the box in your living room. Crazy, huh?
Enjoy and easy reefing.
Hey guys, welcome to our second part of our 3-part episode series on Zoa Madness with Jay, aka LittleBigReef on Instagram or Reef2Reef.
Hello, I'm Billy. Today we're talking more about zoas, and we have a few questions to address, but definitely also feel free to throw more Zoa-related questions in the chat, and we'll get to them.
So yeah, let's continue off where we left last time, right? What we finished off with was, or what I wanted to ask before we finished off last time was like, is there a secret to a very cool Zoa garden? Because you know how zoas grow fast and they all need the space. And when you look up a Zoa garden online, you see all of these, beautiful gardens with like 12 polyps of one, 12 polyps of another, 12 polyps of another, and they're all filled in perfectly. Is it possible to ever attain that long term, or will they eventually outcompete each other?
All right. So, depending on how long you've been going into Google Images and typing in Zoa Gardens and stuff like that, you maybe this is just me, but seen a number of different Zoa Gardens over the years, and the dirty little secret is that in some of these older, more venerable photographs, what you're actually seeing is a collection of zoas that were moved together for a photograph, and then they were, moved back out into two separate areas, so that they're not like all growing on the same rock or the same rock structure or anything like that. Now, obviously, there are, photos that you see where it is stuff that, people have taken their frag plugs, chopped off the bottom, glued those zoas all over the same rock, and then they've all grown together. And so, what happens in those cases is that the zoas will like grow into each other, and then they will grow through each other. But say you've got a section with like Bam Bams, Rastas, and like King Midas. Those guys aren't going to like choke each other out or anything like that. They'll just grow. They'll grow into each other. Sometimes they'll like grow through each other, whatever. But they're going to expend more energy growing in any other direction than into another coral. Now, you take something like Nirvanas or like Pandoras, which are larger zoanthids that, grow very quickly and tend to outcompete stuff. Those will grow right through and then choke out smaller zoanthids. So you ask me, how do you create, a beautiful Zoa garden? And the answer to that is it's twofold. First of all, it's a destination that you're going to arrive at in time. When you glue all these same pieces, to like one rock structure, one rock, or whatever the case may be, it's not really done until everything's grown together. So, you're appreciating it, you're watching it, whatever. It's kind of even like with a single coral, you get a frag and you watch it grow out to the colony. That's where the achievement is with the Zoa garden, is when they, grow out and basically have, all these different types in like the same general sort of area. But, as is so many things in our hobby, like it's very transient. Like, you will get that like perfect picture perfect sort of thing for a period of time. But then, yes, they are, they will grow through each other. And as I mentioned, there's the possibility that some might get choked out. The other part of that is that if you want to create a, like a truly like unique, like neat looking Zoa garden, understanding that like it's not going to exist in a static state, but the things are going to be bumping into each other and whatever. The thing that I think is neatest, that I see most infrequently, that I've had in a previous build, is multiple locations for the same strain. So say you have like oxides, depending on the size of the garden and the aquarium, obviously, having that same strain occur in a couple different places, and then, having your other strains mixed in and throughout, but then saying having Rasta like lower and then like another somewhere on the backside, what you're doing is really creating, something like what you would expect to see more in nature. It's not like in nature, you're going to end up with 12 different, strains all in the same rock, all in their like little space. Having them broken up and having multiple locations, it creates more of like a natural aesthetic. So that would be like the two things I keep in mind when you're talking about Zoa gardens.
One thing I learned the hard way is zoas that have like recently been added to the tank are going to grow out a lot more slowly than obviously zoas that have been established in your tank for a while. And once 2 zoa colonies are established, they're going to grow at different rates. Like Jay mentioned, there are a bunch of different polyzoas that are just invasive in the speed and cadence at which they grow out. So don't be afraid of like trying to balance all the different growth rates of these different zoas, but just keep an eye on them. And keep in mind that when you add a new zoa to your garden, it's not going to be invasive right away. And I've had this issue with AOIs. Actually, I bought 2 different frags of AOIs from Worldwide Corals. Would not recommend. They're way overpriced. Get them from a local reefer because everyone has them. One frag grew like a weed after settling in for a couple weeks. The other frag still has not grown a single extra polyp. So just keep an eye on your garden. You do have to, control and account for the different growth rates as things grow out. Oh, and contrasting colors are a really great way to build out like you could have a tiny zoa garden with 2 different types of zoas in it. If they're complementary colors, they're going to look awesome.
Instead of like having a red one next to a goblin on fire next to other chaos, where they all kind of look the same. Mm-hmm. Alternating colors are really cool. I agree with 100%.
Yeah, yellow and blue zoas are really good for zoa gardens because of that. Like there's a lot of colors that look really great in contrast to yellow. Really great in contrast to yellow. And there's a lot of zoa colors that look really cool in contrast to blue. They're just
there's every color. Zoas come in every color. That's the cool thing about them. Really cool thing about them.
You mentioned that, even in that same vein, like you've got corals that are basically analogous to each other. So you have like daisy cutters or stargazers, whatever you want to call them, where it's yellow center, some white speckling, blue margin, then a green skirt. And then you have these other ones that are called Ring of Fire. I think Cherry sells them as Chemical Romance, but basically they have like a green center, a sparkly white median, and a green skirt. So like you put those 2 next to each other and they're like really pretty complementary because one is just kind of like, the opposite, the inverse version of the other. And so those are kind of neat, when you can find space to do that, in a larger garden.
Yeah. Colors are weird. Using a color wheel like Ginks just mentioned in chat is a very good way when you're placing zoas in the tank. Just having a general area or idea of where you want to put the colors of the zoas. And then that leads me to my next point, actually, because there's so many kinds of zoas out there. What are the best ways to get a proper zoa ID? Like, what do you have in mind? What do you look for? What do you search up?
Once again, like Google Images is going to be your best friend. This is one of those where like I kind of go back and forth on it. Crowdsourcing is probably going to get you either 90% of the way there or like 10% of the way there. And I think we maybe did talk about this a little bit in the last episode. But like Zoaberry has been the go-to resource for quite a while now. I like early in the pandemic, I'm like, I'm going to be so productive. I'm going to lose 20 pounds and I'm going to, do 5 different things. And I'm going to have 10 entries a day. And the admin, he gave me like admin credentials so I could go in and do not just enter zoas, but I could also do updates and stuff. I think that petered out after we failed to bend the curve after like a week and a half. And so I kind of ran out of steam. But Zoaberry is definitely a good resource if you're looking at if you're looking at strains that have been around for a while. There's a lot of stuff documented. it's generally pretty accurate. The thing to remember is that there's no authority control. There's no one governing body that like puts a name on these things. So yeah, we had talked about this last time where I mentioned like the sticker shocks, the flaming brohicans, the reverse hallucinations. It's all the same strain, just all coming through different vendors. And then I believe Banana said, should try and standardize it. But that's the thing, is that vendors don't have that common interest in them all going by the same name. And, at the end of the day, I don't believe it's a malicious decision or anything like that, or they're trying to trick people into, buying a Zoa they have already. It's just the fact that people are free to do what they want and call stuff what they want to call it. So, and I would also say this, when it comes to IDs, it's important to understand that, there's a lot of what I call bucket strains, and this is something I've been talking about in a lot of different circles for a while. It's something that I bring up on Facebook, Reef to Reef, where, you have a Zoa where it's got a yellow mouth, a blue body, and a green skirt. No other defining characteristics, which is a key phrase I'll come back to here in a minute. What I just described is a blow pop. And the thing is, there are probably 2 or 3 dozen variations of that are all principally the same Zoa, that it doesn't really merit having another name for it. So for that reason, it's what I call a bucket strain. And it's a similar sort of thing with Fire and Ice. I'm trying to think, like Green Bay Packers and Dragon Eyes. There's a lot of those Zoas where they come in, they chop them up, they send them out, to aquarists. And, in those cases, like, yeah, you can come up with some cute name for it, but it doesn't really tell me more than what that like general bucket name would tell me. Yeah. Now there are cases where, once again, defining characteristics of a certain Zoa where, it might be red and green, but then there's another attribute to it that isn't going to morph, depending on water parameters or lighting or whatever. And so when you can point to something and it consistently looks one way, and then you can, point to another thing and it consistently presents in its way, you can say that's a defining characteristic. So that is that one's an XYZ and that's an ABC. And I feel like that's really, where the name game and naming stuff, that's where it's useful, because at the end of the day, it's only useful if we're all playing by the same rules and if we're all, looking at the same thing, which they'll do more tank to tank. And, so kind of, generally following guidelines without being dogmatic about it, and the fact is, on Reef to Reef, probably 75% of the IDs, it's a bucket strain where it's, it's a bam bam. Yeah, it's slightly more orange, or maybe it's got a very minor thing, whatever, but save yourself the trouble. But then there's also just plenty of other stuff where like it's brought in such abundance and it's so widely available. Like there's really no point in attaching a more specific name to it, because that name is probably not going to be widely recognized, and it just further confuses people rather than being a useful way of identifying something.
This is true. Speaking of the guidelines, that vendors have to follow, that hobbyists have to follow, or they should follow with it. What are your thoughts, or do you have any tips on flash sales? Like on Reef to Reef, where they'll post a picture and their own name, whether it's a name that they just made up, or they're renaming it, or, they're picking a name with something that looks similar to it, and then putting like a hashtag or like a $8 mark price on it. What are your thoughts, or do you have tips on those?
Well, okay, so I feel like this is two things. Are we talking about flash sales and my general overall feelings about those? Or are we talking more about vendors just putting attributes on a specific strain to be able to call it something?
Let's do the latter of them.
Well, what I would say is that super science, or I don't know if I'm saying that right. I'm not familiar with the comic.
Super Saiyans, Dragon Ball Z.
Yeah, no, that's one of those things where I'm afraid I'm going to mispronounce something in Latin, but then I'm not Billy, how do you say it again?
Super Saiyan.
Super Saiyan.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I have been saying that wrong for 7 or 8 years and no one's corrected me. So
They know what you mean. It's all shorthand, right?
right. But no, so at the end of the day, like that's one where I frequently see it attributed to like scrambled eggs or like eagle eyes. Scrambled eggs is pretty unforgivable because like that is a yellow and blue coral. It's not, orange and green. Then again, I remember a few years ago when we had that, like, is the dress black with like white or is it like blue with gold? If you remember that thing, which is a whole other.
Yeah. Ike's relationship sent it over to that.
I'm pretty convinced just general discussions that like probably 50% of fellows are colorblind that are in the hobby. It might be all the time we spend with the blue lights. I'm not certain. But no, so, you have certain vendors where like, they're going to say, this is a super cyan. No.
Again.
Yeah, it's like saying.
It's where the emphasis is. So I'm sorry. I'm legitimately not screwing around. I'm just trying to reteach my tongue how to say it.
Damn name.
So, and then you compare that against like an eagle eye, and it's like, an eagle eye or a watermelon, and it's like, well, those ones, they don't have the white blue center, which is the whole point of that. So yeah, it's unfortunate, but it's one of those things. I had a friend that worked for one of the larger outfits down in Florida, and he was on the farm and he enjoyed it. It was cool. He got to do a lot of cool stuff, work with a lot of cool stuff. But the salespeople in the front office, we talk about this, and he'd say like, hey, they're just putting names on stuff. Like, we try and tell them when it's like egregiously incorrect, but like, they're gonna put whatever they put on there, and then that's that. So, I have a little bit higher expectations for some folks. King Midas and Tutti Frutti are two that often I see just mislabeled. And at the end of the day, they're both yellow zoas. It just so happens that Tutti Fruttis have a little orange mouth, and if you're looking at them in a vacuum, you might not necessarily know. But if you have them, side by side, well, it's pretty apparent. So as far as live sales go in these larger, outfits where, you got to realize it's not any one person doing it. It's a team in the back of the house cutting stuff and taking care of stuff, whatever. And then you've got a marketing team, which, I wouldn't expect someone to know like every single Zoa and what it should look like and what those defining characteristics are and stuff like that. It is what it is, Now, if you want to ask me my thoughts on live sales generally, I will certainly not tell you that. So,
yeah, no, those are controversial as it is. It's okay.
It doesn't need to be controversial. It's pretty straightforward. Don't tell me that something is $100 when we all know retail on $30, and then you market 60% off at $40. I find some of these to be pretty disingenuous. There are certain outfits that are it's a little insulting,
It's predatory, I think. Mainly predatory towards new people. Or, hey, these $300 5-headed Duncans are on sale now for $40. Get them while you can.
But by the same token, too, like, I understand why some of their base prices are going to be higher just because they have more costs to cover than like a local fish store that is well supported by, local hobbyists bringing in frags and stuff, or even a person in their house where, they've got their frag tank and they're selling stuff. Obviously, there's a tremendous amount of overhead, especially as you continue to scale up. And then you have, different people, whether it's marketing or an IT person or whatever. Everyone wants to get their money. So, like, that's why, Company X out of Florida is going to list Utter Chaos, at like 65 for a 3-polyp frag. I understand that, and maybe you'll sell that, and if someone wants to pay that that's their deal then. And what I will say is that companies like that, they don't screw around on shipping. They generally ship well, and they generally, tend to cover the aquarist when something happens versus, peer-to-peer stuff where it can be the Wild West sometimes.
A little risky, yeah.
I've had people send me stuff where they put the heat pack in the wet bag.
So,
and
it's wild.
You have to explain to them, like, hey, no, moisture, but more specifically water, is going to kill the heat pack and render this thing inert, and we're going to have a cold box on our hands. So the live sales, I would say do this if and this goes out to any of the larger vendors, but listen, instead of saying it's $100 and you got to take $60 off, just, I don't know, just don't do that. How about that? How about we just don't do that?
Fake markdowns.
Fake markdowns. They're actually above market rate, even for, retail vendors.
There's three main psychological manipulations that are happening on live sales. One is, of course, something that's prevalent in the entire hobby, which is the quote unquote discount. You just cannot take any list price at face value, focus only on the quote unquote discount price and figure out, is this something I'm willing to pay for this coral? None of those list prices are actually genuine. I mean, sometimes people will do like site-wide sales, but they're going to mark up on top of that original markup. They're not going to mark up on the original price. Keep that in mind. Price manipulation, which should be or probably is illegal. Second one is urgency. There's a limited time to these live sales. If you miss out on these quote unquote deals, they're gone forever. That's not true. There's a live sale 7 times a week and every other week. Yeah. Last thing is scarcity. They're going to act like, oh, this is a brand new strain that no one else has. If you're going to get it, you have to get it from us and you have to get it fast. But luckily it's on sale. It's the trifecta of psychological manipulation that those shopping channels use. Every live sale ever always uses. Just keep those things in mind. And I mean, everyone's doing it, so like that doesn't make it okay. But if you're armed with that knowledge and you're equipped to handle those manipulations, you'll save a lot of money and be much happier with your reef tank.
Well, I think those are all excellent points, Billy. On your first one there, one thing I'd like to point out is, am I allowed to name names here in a positive manner?
Yeah, go for it.
Positive, yeah. Positive is fine.
So, cherry corals. If you're from the Midwest, you've probably met Todd or some of his folks at a swap here or there. They actually, when they do their live sales and when they run sales generally, they actually do mark down from your list. And now that being said, I find the prices to be competitive. As with all vendors, you are paying a certain premium, but by the same token, the conditioning simply cannot be beat. So that's I really like that outfit. I really respect the fact that when they do run sales, they are actually marking down from a price that's rooted in reality. They're not just saying that this thing is a $300 thing, but I'm going to sell it to you today for $70. So I feel like that deserves a shout out.
That's awesome. Yeah, when I go to like local fish stores, they're not innocent of this either. So they'll walk through the trifecta again. But again, yeah, I'm really happy to hear that at least one shop is not lulled by the sweet lullaby of psychological sales manipulations. I got to check cherry corals out. I don't think I've ordered from them before, but I have heard really good things from a lot of people.
Definitely give them a look. The condition cannot be beat. The husbandry, how he aquacultures the stuff and whatever. I really like what they do there. And I've had just really good luck with stuff coming over from them. And, at his core, Todd really is a collector. So you see that come through in some of the pieces that are offered. And then they do update every 2 weeks. So, it's always that waiting game where I'll watch the site, wait for a sale to come up. And then I know a piece has been sitting there for like 2 or 3 weeks. And then maybe something else lands that I want. And then I can get this piece that has bonus polyps from having been grown out for a while. And then I compare that with something else and justify shipping. So that's, I don't know, that's one of my things I do to try and game the system.
Yeah, you're reversing the trifecta by proving that there is literally no scarcity in these things.
There's zero scarcity, and if there is, it'll be public later on.
Okay, but that being the case, he did post a poinsettia Zoa. I want to say it was in December or January, 2021 or 2022. So poinsettias are a beautiful zoanthid. They're in the car family. Generally speaking, it is a solid red, larger bodied zoanthid with a bright green center. And they've been in captivity for quite a while now. They're incredibly slow growers, even under the best of circumstances. And so it's one of those things where ARC ultimately lost their colony. I know that, they're floating through, but they're very infrequently available. And, I one night was up late, and I see this poinsettia drop for, $150 and it's a single polyp. And I could not log into PayPal fast enough to complete that sale. So there are times where like you got to bite the bullet and, you see something you want. But part of that is also just knowing and understanding, the actual rarity of it, so.
Yeah, very true. I would say like maybe 99% of sales online are not that case. And usually when you're a beginner in the hobby, you won't be able to recognize the truly scarce stuff. But luckily, by the time you've learned more about the hobby, maybe those poinsettias have someone's managed to culture them, or they've been propagated to a bunch of different stores and each of them has a couple polyps for sale. It's mostly a waiting game for scarce stuff like that because people will find it again. It's very rare that like stuff does not reemerge eventually in the hobby.
Well, so this actually brings up an interesting point that was floated on Reef to Reef earlier this week, where someone posted, do strains ever die out in captivity? And I thought it was a really good question. It's led to some really great back and forth on the message board. And the short answer is that yes, there is stuff that is gone and there's nothing in captivity that's going to morph into that thing. And even though the ocean's a very large place, like other examples of that strain have not been found. And so that's why like there are some cases, one right now is golden leopard zoas, where if you see those come up and, you're a serious hobbyist, well, you're looking at perhaps $300 a polyp. But I tell you what, that thing is going to be harder to find than a stratosphere right now because so few people have it. It's temperamental. They generally do grow well. I've had really good sustained success with them over the years. Unfortunately, it's one that fell casualty when I moved. But yeah, like there are certainly those times where like this might be your last bite at the apple. And I had that happen with Ultimate Chaos Zoas, which is another strain where they're virtually gone. You're not going to be able to find them. No amount of money in the world is going to buy them. You got to find some dude that doesn't really care that much, that just so happens to have a colony of them growing in his tank. And so I had one more go with them. It was shortly before we moved. I got a frag from Supreme Reefs. It was well conditioned. It was doing well. It was doing great. We moved, and unfortunately, it was one of about a dozen that I would really love to have back because there are just no more out there.
The funny part is there's somebody out there who has this Zoa taking over a rock and they don't care for it at all. Like somewhere out there in the world is somebody with like each of these Zoas and they're fragging it and throwing it away because they don't know what they have.
His name, Andrew Sandler.
No, I tell you what, that so that brings up another point is that and this was part of the our discussion. So I'm trying to just divvy out the meaningful cliff notes. But essentially, when these new strains come in, it's threefold. First of all, like when that strain comes in, there's a certain amount that is collected and then gets divvied up and that goes out. Oh shoot, I lost my train of thought. Oh, but ultimately, you have these zoas that come in and then you put a big number on them. And so that'll limit how many hands they get into, because certainly on some of these new must-have zoanthid strains, people will shamelessly ask hundreds and hundreds of dollars for them with no real clue on like how rare they actually are or whether more are going to be collected. And a prime example of this was the predator zoas, where when they came out, GMKs were still selling for, $500 a piece or whatever. And so people put a $300 price point per polyp on them because they're similar, just kind of like a poor man's version. But then as we got further into the summer, it was very apparent that they found like a huge collection of these. And so I know vendors that were bringing in, well, they were getting whole rocks of them. And of course, the price just, completely plummeted on them. But the thing is that, for all these ones that came in, I've not seen very many Generation 2 or Generation 3 ones available, which means that like long term, that Zoa, like I question like how well it, can acclimate, long term to captivity. Because obviously there's some of these Zoa strains that acclimate to long term captivity almost without issue. And then, as has been my experience and sort of what I'm suspecting with the predators, is that there's some, and I actually had firsthand experience with multiple different strains of Stratocasters, where, they do good, you get them in, they survive the trauma of transshipping, you get them cleaned up, you make sure that they're not being affected by a protozoan or bacterial issue, they're doing good, they're looking good, they're adjusting to life in the aquarium. And then one day you go down and like they're collapsing, their color shifting, the mouths are agape, and you end up losing them. And so I've had this happen on like maricultured and wild strains that I've had, and then in the interest of getting them into other people's hands, I've farmed them out to close friends where we've had this happen, and I've had it happen in reverse as well, where people have given me stuff, and then after 7 or 8 months of captivity, where it should be doing well and it should be putting down polyps, they all just collapse at the same time. And if you go on Instagram and look up the hashtag Darth Raven Zoas, there was a gorgeous one from my buddy Mike P. He's down there in Florida. And he had sent some to me. I think he got one to Rudy of Golden Basket. I know he sent some. They all collapsed. They were all doing well, and then every single one of them collapsed after the 7 or 8 month mark in captivity. And it's a shame, and it's gone. And there's just, they haven't found any more of those. And oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, you're fine. I was going to say that's awful, and I'm sorry for your loss. Is there like a kind of not catch all, but catch most dipping treatment that you use on these zoas to hopefully save off that 8 month lifespan?
Oh, no. So, I mean, I think some of that is just the ability of any individual organism to, acclimate to captive conditions. And, I liken it to an Achilles tang where, say you bring 10 of them in, 2 of them will do fine. They'll eat, they'll make the adjustment. Few of them will die in shipping. A few of them will make the shipping, but then they'll refuse to eat. And then, you've got other ones where they'll do well for a period of time, but you might lose them to flukes, or like someone might have, they don't have a controller on their tank, and then like their thermometer blows up, or they have a catastrophic failure in one place or another, and they end up losing it. So like, you look at it long term, both just the nature of the fact that it's a living thing, and then everything else that can go wrong, stuff's going to happen, and so that's why with like wild zoas, I was getting a lot of them in 2020, 2021, and then even into the first part of 2022. And, if I was batting like, 300, I felt like a rock star. And I'm saying over the course of, 8 to 9 months, upwards of a year, because when you're doing this long enough, like, 4 month sample size doesn't really tell you that much. So, So yeah, but as far, so some things are just not meant to be caged. Some birds are just not meant to be caged, and that's the way it is. And, even with the greatest amount of attention, like, we lose stuff, and that's the very unfortunate name of the game with coral. But that being said, no, I found that aggressive quarantine before anything goes into my trough is a huge factor to prevent, protozoan and bacterial stuff from coming in. And then depending on the nature of what might be affecting it, whether it's visible or not, obviously doing Bayer dips or Coral RX for like larger unicellular stuff like, spiders and worms and nudies and whatever, that's just good housekeeping. I think the thing that you most often tend to see, there's I suspect it's like a dino or something like that that will come in on wild zoanthids, and it kind of gives them a dirty sort of appearance, and then at some point the polyps quit closing and they just sort of look like they have like rusty like slime over the top of them. That's one where I found out the hard way, but I found out the best cure for that is ChemiClean, which has been a standard go-to now that Furon 2 has been discontinued. That ChemiClean, which you can use as a global hammer and treat system-wide, and it is also effective as a standalone dip. The thing with dipping is that it's not a one-and-done sort of situation. Dipping, you do continuously for 4 to 5 days. Then you take a rest day or two, and then kind of like when you take antibiotics, you have to do a second round, even if the zoanthid is showing improvement and, it visually looks good. You just want to do like that second round of dips, which, that's a commitment. You're talking 4 or 5 days on, 2 or 3 day break, and then 4 or 5 days on again. But that's kind of what it takes to knock out, some of these things that come in on zoanthids. They get past that and they're healthy and they're looking good and whatever, then you can introduce them into the farm, or you can introduce them into display, whatever the case may be. So I'll also throw out there Metroplex is another dip where, in lieu of Furon 2, Metroplex I found to be a good tool for other issues that can affect zoas. And that's normally when you see sloughing of tissue, or like profound color shifting, or like mouth gaping. I'll generally hit it with the Metroplex.
Awesome. So ChemiClean, Metroplex, and sorry, what was the third one? The first one?
Well, Furon 2 was the go-to for a long time, and that was the gold standard for treating zoopox. Unfortunately, a core component, it's like nitrofurazoma or something like that, is a carcinogen. And, before they just like sort of thought it was, but now it's been confirmed. You can still buy it as a standalone product. I have like a big bottle still in a bag down in my basement. But once I found out, that it's like, yes, repeated exposure to this stuff will give you cancer, that kind of, cooled my desire to be using that as part of my, suite of medications. So, and for the time being, I don't know that we have a good answer for zoopox. The Metroplex, I believe it's a broad spectrum, gram negative, gram positive, which was similar to the Furon 2. But fortunately, I haven't been in the position where I've had to treat for zoopox, so I cannot, unfortunately, tell anybody right now what the correct treatment is if you should come across that.
Zoopox.
So a good triple threat would be Revive, which is, I think, similar ingredients to the Bayer dip, Metroplex, and erythromycin or ChemiClean. That will solve 99% of your Zoa problems. The reason we're going through all these different pests that could affect zoas is there are a lot of things that eat zoas. Apparently, they are delicious. But luckily, zoas are also one of the hardiest corals in existence. They have a lot of things that like to eat them, but they've evolved to be resilient. And as long as you get your corals aquacultured, dip them a couple times before you introduce them to your main tank, you're 99% of the time you're going to be golden.
Yeah, I said it the first time around, but like zoas are always going to give you a chance to save them. Obviously, being proactive and being heavy-handed initially is a large part of it. Like being timely and recognizing that there's a problem and start addressing it before you're certain there's a problem. Hey, listen, Zoa looks at me a way I don't like I'm going to dip it just out of spite, So. But yeah, and I'll add too. I generally use Coral RX as a standalone dip. The Metroplex, and which you can only use as a dip. I don't believe it's safe to use it system wide, although you can if you're treating fish in a fowler or like a fish only. But the Metroplex as a dip is great. The ChemiClean, the erythromycin, those two, I don't mix them together because, part of it is just experimenting and working through it. But I will add Lugol's solution into the dip when I use either of those products. So it's always Metroplex and Lugol's or ChemiClean and Lugol's. And then if I'm really, truly concerned, I will also ChemiClean the system and then stack dips on top of that just to really make sure I'm knocking out that issue before it can get a foothold.
Yeah, is this the same treatment that you do when you frag them as well?
No. So when it comes to fragging, the big thing with fragging zoanthids, when you cut them, obviously you have to work with what it's giving you. And so there are going to be times where you would like to cut like these two polyps together and those two polyps together, but really depending on how they're growing and the substance that's underlying that you're working with, you just kind of have to work with what that's giving you so that you're cutting the least amount of tissue as possible. And so, yeah, just running through fragging really quickly. I use the Ocean Wonders frag plugs. These are a ceramic one. I always pre-soak them in aquarium water for about 24 hours beforehand. I find that kind of seasons the surface a little bit to prepare to accept glue versus just taking a dry plug, putting a dab of glue on there and, hoping for the best. So I'll soak them 24 hours and then I have a little rack. And so when I take the plugs out of the water, I just rub the head of the plug on a towel and then I put it on the rack. And then in my mind, okay, this is seasoned and this is prepared to accept glue. And then, whatever frag that I'm going to put on top of it. So from that point, I'll go ahead, I'll cut my frags and I'll put them on, the plugs with the amount of glue. And I just try and be mindful of the glue. You want to minimize the amount of glue that's going to touch zoanthid tissue. There are some zoanthids that will absolutely not accept that under any circumstances, and the tissue will just rot away immediately. There's other ones that obviously have a higher tolerance for it. But that being the case, you're even seeing right now a lot of my buddies that do sticks, they're doing the thing with the epoxy, the plug, the epoxy, and then the glue, which is supposed to help with tissue and to keep it from rotting out on you if you're doing sticks.
Can you explain that for the uninformed?
Well, so that is where my finer understanding of it kind of goes out the window.
Okay. I can explain.
Yeah. Oh, yes, please do that.
So what you do is you take a frag plug, you pre-cure epoxy to it, and you put a little divot in that epoxy. Sometimes you'll use an actual coral skeleton to make that divot kind of coral shaped. This is for SPS, by the way. It's kind of overkill for most soft corals. But then what you'll do is you'll take that epoxy kind of mold, put a tiny dab of glue in there, put the frag on top of that glue. What you basically want to end up not putting glue directly on coral flesh. You want to glue the skeleton to the epoxy. And then you can spritz it if you want with Instacure or whatever that stuff is and, hold it so it fully seals. This is big brain frag work that most of you won't have to worry about. But that's the method he's describing. So if you ever see a frag plug with a big bubble of looks like rock, but it's perfectly spherical, that's epoxy. And if they've done it right, it has no negative detriment to your coral.
I've never had luck with epoxy ever.
And so that's even yet another episode for you guys down the road, because there's absolutely a correct way to use epoxy, and everyone is probably ready to yell at me right about now. But the fact is that epoxy has been around and it's got great applications, but most people are using it wrong, and I'll leave it at that. But no, Billy, to your point, yeah. So, in doing that with the epoxy, then you create that little well that allows you to put glue in there. And then when you put the frag in there, you're not just like dunking the frag in a puddle of glue that's on like a flat, try saying that 5 times fast, flat frag.
Yeah,
plug.
nice. You got it.
I had to think about it, man. So sorry.
Flat rat plug.
But yeah, so thanks for the explanation there. As for the zoanthids and stuff, as I was describing my process, once they're on that frag plug, I then have, the same containers I've been using, since the beginning of time, that are smaller Tupperwares where my frag rack that I do this on, it's one I made myself, but it only holds 12 at a time, so I can only cut 12 at a time. So, and I have multiple of these racks, so obviously when I'm down there cutting 200 at a time, like I'm not, I've gotten very efficient at doing this over the years. But anyhow, so I'll take this and then I'll put it in this water. I actually throw an air stone in there and then drop, a few drops of Lugol's in there. And so that air stone obviously moves around the water within this like small container. I don't think it's probably more than like 10 ounces if I had to look, along with Lugol's and then obviously aquarium water. And then I have the plugs in there. And so I leave them in there for 8 to 10 minutes or so with the bubbler. Just let that Lugol, work its way around the floor, the plugs and, whatever. And then I'll move on. I'll start cutting, the next group of things I want to cut. And then once I have those loaded up in the next rack, I'll take that first rack and I'll take those guys over, drop them into the appropriate space on the rack. And, after I've done like 2 or 3 in any one single bath, I'll actually take that water and I'll throw it out and I'll pull fresh aquarium water, fresh Lugol's, and then I'll keep going. And then also my cutting surface as well that I'm working on is just a piece of a beat to hell. It's probably, like 3 or 4 inches by 3 or 4 inches. It's not particularly big. I'll take that surface and I'll clean that off as well. And I'll even, wipe down my blade and stuff. And, because really what you're doing is you're cutting apart animals, you're stressing them out. There's a certain amount of juices mixing going on. And then obviously in this dipping container, you've got stressed animals as well. So I don't know that that's necessarily like sanitary sort of stuff, but since I incorporated that probably 4 or 5 years ago, I found that it works a lot better. The mentality is probably like, oh, if you're going to cut a bunch of stuff, you just use the water and you use the surface and whatever. But I found that wiping that cutting surface down and then swapping out that dip water, after two or 3, groups, like that does make a difference.
Oh, it's critical. I mean, one of the two things that corals can use to deter the growth of other corals by killing them is their internal organs and the juices they're in. Other thing, of course, is the nematocysts that they use to sting, but a lot of soft corals don't do that. And a lot of corals have both. So you need, the iodine helps a little bit, but you gotta treat it like a surgical operation because you are literally doing surgery. And just keep everything as sanitary as possible. Don't trust water just because it looks clean. There are weird goopy things and stinging cells and toxins that are leached out into that water, sometimes even palytoxin, that the corals are using they're releasing as a stress response in an attempt to kill whatever is stressing them. So you got to keep it extra clean. There's no such thing as clearing your dip water too much or clearing your frag water too much.
Or
Don't drink your frag water.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And don't
Don't drink your frag
tastes
water.
bad. Like, there's no reason to. And also,
How do you know what it tastes like?
I'd say the other thing too is that, the first couple days after you're cutting, you also need to keep an eye on stuff. And, like if a tissue is starting to rot, it's very obvious. And at that case, it might be because of glue or it might be because of this or that. So, I sort of appraise the situation. And then like, if it doesn't look like it's going to work, I'll go ahead and, cull it and I'll knock it off, and then I'll just drop it into my my quarantine tank. And then if it makes it, it makes it. If it doesn't, it doesn't, but whatever. So.
Do you put your zoas in lower light after you frag them, or do you put them right back in the regular light that they were at?
So I have a section of the farm that is basically like the area I put stuff. After I cut it, it can accommodate, probably 200 to 300 Zoa frags. I have an overflow area at the opposite end of the trough where I can also bank like another 200 Zoas or whatever. Because I run basically the same T5s on both sides and everything. Everything stays in roughly the same par. Certainly nothing is going in higher par because the area is kind of off on a side. So on dead center, I'm like 150 par with the lights full on. The highest they would be like 130. So it is a little bit lower. And for whatever reason, like with how I have everything laid out down there, like that's just where I put stuff when I frag it. So it's a good water flow area. I know what the par is. There are some where if I'm doing an initial frag, say I, like when I fragged the poinsettias, which they actually grew very quickly for me initially and knocked out a couple babies and stuff. I fragged those, but because I zero intention of selling them and they're not coming off a colony, I put those in place and I put it right next to where it had been. That way I basically assure myself that like I'm going to walk away with both of them, hopefully.
Cool. And then like what par, okay, so that's a par that you keep your new look frags at, right? What par do you keep your regular souls at? Like, is there too much par or is there too high of a par they can have?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good question. It's definitely a key topic with zoanthids. So you go back to a very basic premise. This is laid out in Anthony Calfo's book, the Handbook of Coral Propagation, which might be out of print. I know there's an edition 1, and then I think there's a second edition, but you can probably get it through your library if you do an interlibrary loan. It's an excellent book, just top to bottom. And he basically discusses, I think it's in the forward, where he talks about the fact that when you keep, corals together, you're making compromises because zoanthids grow in a different part of the reef than SPS. SPS and LPS are generally not going to be buddies on the reef. Some of these come from reef gutters. Some of them, come from atolls. Zoanthids, come from areas closer to the shore where they grow in a mat. You've got, LPS, especially if it's stuff that's like growing in the substrate with a coral buried, with a, skeleton buried, like a wall hammer or something like that. All these guys are coming from different areas of the reef collectively. And so you think about like our aquariums and like, aside from, the fact that like the lighting and everything else is artificial about them, when you keep all of these different kinds of corals together in the same environment, unless you have truly a gigantic aquarium, you're not going to be able to replicate each one's, biological niche. So you're going to be making compromises on, one guy or the other guy, whatever their preference would be, unless you're keeping them in like a specimen tank where, it's the one kind of coral. That's where you're keeping it there. You're not doing anything else. So that being the case, zoanthids, what's really neat about them is that they are so forgiving. And, the more common strains, once again, throwing out like the Rasta, Bam Bam sort of combination, they can tolerate a very large range of par. Ones that are very interesting, like Utter Chaos, we all know they can vary incredibly aquarium to aquarium. But even within the same aquarium, if you have some that are higher up or some that are lower down, their ability to morph and whatever changes quite a bit. And a lot of that is, dependent on light. So
I highly recommend keeping your utter chaos in higher light, because not only will they shrink down and lose that weird, like, mushroomy tree look that paleothos get, but at least in my case, they got a really cool, like, deep, dark, black-blue center that the orange that they're famous for is kind of swirling around. That's at least my personal experience. But like Jay said, you could do the same thing and they'll turn green or something, because we really don't know why.
Well, you think about it, back in 2012 when, the word of utter chaos was, people are like, have you seen these things yet? They're crazy. You had these iconic pictures where they had like the red skirt, just that deep cream, like taupe, like sort of brown, like swirl. And then, like that little blue eye. And I have to tell you, I'm happy that you have achieved that, because that is not one that I've been able to get them to replicate that look.
What are you doing?
So the ones I have currently, like they're just doing the cream thing with like the red skirt and whatever. They're fine. They're healthy. That was another one where like they just never really recovered well from the move, and I had lost a strain that I'd had for 7 or 8 years. I remember I paid like $50 a polyp for them, I think.
Way back when.
I had those forever. I grew them out. I had huge colonies of them. They were fantastic. I loved them. And then going into the move, like, I probably should have banked a few more with one of my buddies, and you have some buds, candy and nuts, all that sort of stuff. So the strain I have now, it's a fine strain. They're really starting to get established. So at that point, I have them in lower par. I have them in probably like 100 par. And I'm, optimistic that once I really get them rolling, like, I can move them back into higher par, and I can really get that like blue eye. I've gotten the cream. I've gotten good, breaking patterns. I've gotten the bright red skirt. I just have never achieved that bright blue eye. So... but so back to a larger question. So zoanthids, like, let's talk about par then. In the greater constellation of things, your SPS, you got to bake them under 350 or whatever in order to get those home wreckers and those Tierra del Fuego and, the Walt Disneys to really get them to color correctly. Zoanthids do, most of them tolerate a wide range, but then you have some where, you're talking about like the Flaming Mohicans, the Dayglow volcanoes, like OG Adonis, and even hallucinations are a prime example. Those guys actually do better in like 80 par. Wolverines are another example. And these guys are often tagged with those are very difficult to keep, or they're melters or whatever. And in most conventional aquariums where you're trying to keep a bunch of, different kinds of coral together, they're not going to do well with those parameters, because how many people have a section of their aquarium, that can accommodate a coral that wants like 80 par. And not to say that some folks don't, but like these are things that are hard to plan for. That's why in my case, I have this trough that's 30 inches across, and I could be 150 on center, and I'm like 80 on the wings. So if there's ever any doubt, I can put that thing in 80 par and make sure it's good and happy, and then, slowly, roll the dice and risk, and I can like bump it up a little bit higher par if I want to. But that's really the truth of the matter, is that some of these zoanthids that are very difficult to keep, they need lower par, and they need a great deal of nutrition. A lot of the ones that are easier to keep, the ones that a lot of us are much more familiar with, well, they're a lot more tolerant. They can take higher par. The nutrition isn't quite as important. And once again, that goes back to something we talked about in the first episode, where form follows function. If a zoanthid is not, struggling under high par, it allows it to open up a little bit wider when it's a little bit bigger. It's better able to capture nutrition food out of the water column, so it's able to support its growth that way. And I found that to be the case also with like, the poinsettias, for example, the Jason Fox crazy ladies. That's another one where it's that high nutrition, low par is really the key. So think of it like, tangs where, you have Zebrasoma, you have Tenocotylis, you have Acanthrus, and you have like Nassa, or your four main ones. But, just like as a yellow tang and Achilles tang are two very different tangs, some of these zoanthids, even though physically they look the same, the requirements and what you need to really keep them successfully over a sustained period of time is actually different.
Very true. Lots of things to keep in mind when you're starting a salty flower farm like Jay has.
On the water flowers.
Very true.
It's really cool. This is a pretty good place to call it for now.
Thanks for listening to part 2 of our Zoa episode with Jay, aka LittleBigReef.
Feel free to check out Jay anytime you want. His tag is LittleBigReef on Instagram or Reef to Reef. He has by far one of the most amazing collections of zoas that I have ever personally seen, and it's breathtaking. It is nothing short of breathtaking. If you want to buy zoas from him, or prod his brain with any other questions you might have had, feel free to reach out to him. Otherwise, thank you guys so much for tuning in, and Billy, take it away.
Easy reef it. Thank you for listening to another episode of Slice of the Reef.
Your number one podcast for all things fishy, with your hosts, Giancarlo and Billy. Make sure you subscribe to our podcast on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or anywhere else that podcasts are held. That way, you'll never miss an episode. If you want to be a part of our podcast, join us on discord.xyz/Slice of the Reef, where we'll be recording in front of a live audience. We also give you a moment at the end of every episode for a live Q&A session, and we're very interactive with our fans. So we'd love for you to join. You can also check out our website for articles, guides, calculators, and information on our upcoming episodes at sliceofthereef.org. Hope to see you guys soon.
Farewell and easy reefing.